to understand and discover really consequential periods of history. The absolute best records you can have are those written by people who are on the ground and eyewitness to these events. And these logbooks are just such documents. They were written by Graham Lumsden, who was a midshipman serving in the Royal Navy on the China Station during the early 1930s. Now, at that time, Japan was increasingly looking to China as a region where it might expand its empire. And in 1931, Japan orchestrated a number of false flag incidents that led eventually to what's called the Shanghai Incident, which was an early 1932 event where Japan effectively attacked Chinese forces in Shanghai and occupied parts of Shanghai for several months until there was a kind of semi-negotiated peace, which eventually led to Japan's withdrawal from the League of Nations. Now, these logbooks, as I said, were written by Graham Lumsden, and at that time he was serving with HMS Suffolk, which was a heavy cruiser based out in East Asia, an important British ship. And in these records, as part of his officer training, he was required to record all of his experiences, things he was told by his commanding officers, and his perceptions of events at the time. And these really wonderful records cover his 2 years of service out in China, including the period in the early 1932 when he sailed as part of the crew of HMS Suffolk up from Hong Kong and into Shanghai, where he was eyewitness to this unfolding Shanghai incident. The British were really worried at the time that the fighting would spill over into the international kind of concessionary areas in Shanghai, and that this would drag Britain and other powers into a more major war, which is why Suffolk and other ships were sent so readily from Hong Kong to Shanghai. Now, Lumsden really has a real eye for detail and is very tuned to what's happening. And so over the course of these pages, he records what he's hearing about the Chinese and Japanese fighting, preparations that Britain was making in the event of armed conflict that it would have to be involved in. He records visits to the front lines, but there's also that kind of charming British colonial edge to it as well, where he's able to break away from the fighting to go and play billiards at the American club or have games of hockey on the deck of this ship moored in the centre of Shanghai just by this war zone. After Shanghai, when things have quietened down, he then sails with Suffolk up to Qingdao and Weihai Wei, and they're doing lots of gunnery training, and he's doing training in a submarine as well, because Britain, of course, is just, even though things are quietening down a little bit between China and Japan, Britain is still really worried about how this conflict will develop in the future. These records are absolutely fabulous. You can see here as well that they're illustrated with dozens of his watercolours. He did a lot of watercolour maps and pencil sketches. These were done again as part of an officer's training, but allow us to record kind of understand what he's seeing and how he's perceiving these events and how the British are perceiving these events as well. These records are also so pleasing because Lumsden himself goes on to a really illustrious career in the Royal Navy. He ends up working for the Admiralty and having a role as the captain of the ship during the after the Second World War. And these are really the beginning of a very successful naval career. So fabulous sources on early 1930s Chinese history, an important geopolitical moment.